Welcome back to Proxy, everybody. And it has finally come. The nerfs have come. I didn't think they were going to come until Thursday, so it was a little bit of a surprise when I woke up this morning and saw that they were live. And guys, they got us. Pretty heavy nerfs. Not necessarily to individual units, but to our army special rules. And a couple of these nerfs will seem very familiar to you. There was things that we expected to be nerfed, but there was other things that I didn't quite expect to be nerfed so hard. So we will take a look at those in today's video. So what we're going to be diving into today is what exactly got nerfed in the Eldari Index and what the nerfs mean and where do we go from here. So let's go ahead and look at what exactly got nerfed. So the first thing, and probably the biggest thing that got nerfed, was Strands of Fate. So Strands of Fate got reduced to 6 dice starting out. So used to be 12, now it's 6. That's cut in half. That's a very severe hit to our Strands of Fate dice pool. Phantasm also got hit with a massive nerf. And when I say massive, it wasn't like the nerf last time, which, basically made it so that, monsters and vehicles and jet bikes couldn't be targeted with it. But now it's a simple D6 move instead of a 7-inch move, which is massive. So a D6 move is very random. And not only that, but it's obviously just less than 7. Even at its highest, it's still lower than 7 inches. So unfortunately, Phantasm got hit pretty big. Night Spinners, they got changed. Now we expected this. They basically got the, Basilisk special rule. So -2 to movement, -2 to advance rolls, and -2 to charges. This was expected. So, it wasn't out of the blue. But yes, Night Spinners did get hit with a decently sized nerf. And something I really didn't expect, but Fate's Messenger can now only be used on the bearer of the enhancement and not the unit that the bearer joins. So again, pretty massive nerf to Fate's Messenger. It's really probably only going to be good on a couple of characters as of now. The Incar also got targeted with a decent nerf. It wasn't a massive nerf, but it is pretty significant. And basically, it can only teleport once during each of your turns and not your opponent's as well. So before, it could teleport basically whenever it wanted to. Now it can only teleport in your turn once. So the combinations of being able to kill something and then teleport your Yinkarn to it and then charge your Yinkarn in, that's still available. You can still do that. But unfortunately, you're not going to be able to then bring the Incar back to safety during your opponent's turn when they kill something else. So as its viability in highly competitive play goes, I think it's going to be much less useful in those situations. Wraithguard's War Construct ability can also only target the ability that attacked it. So this was a nerf that I was actually hoping wouldn't happen. I hoped that Wraithguard would, increase in points, maybe be limited to 5 models a unit. But I was hoping this wouldn't happen because at higher levels of play, against your normal opponent who's more casual, this probably won't occur too much. You're probably going to want to shoot back at the unit that shot at you in the first place. But now, since you have to do it, a good opponent is just simply going to not shoot at the Wraithguard until they're no longer a problem. So their most valuable units are either going to be out of range of the Wraithguard's attacks, or, quite simply, they're just not going to shoot them and engage them in combat so that their powerful units can be safe. So there's a lot of counterplay to that. And now it seems that, at higher levels of play, Wraithguard aren't going to be as useful for dealing damage in the opponent's turn. And not to mention also that Fate's Messenger has been nerfed. So a Spirit Seer with Fate's Messenger in a Wraithguard blob is just no longer a good idea. Spirit Seer, of course, is still good, but nowhere near as powerful as it once was. As for the points changes, only a couple things got points changes, which was a little bit surprising to me. The Night Spinner went up by 30 points to a massive 210, which was, in my honest, humble opinion, ridiculous. Because quite frankly, it was already very expensive, and when you changed its ability, I felt like that was all that was needed. I don't think the points cost was what was making it OP. I think the OP part about it was the ability preventing advances. So it looks like the Night Spinner got hit with the old double nerf, unfortunately. Wraithguard also went up by 20 points per 5 models. They're now 190 for 5 and 380 for 10. Now, Obviously, when you combine this with the other two nerfs, the Fate's Messenger nerf, which, will affect Wraithguard, the Phantasm nerf, which will also affect Wraithguard, and not to mention the War Construct nerf, so I guess that's technically 3 other nerfs that they kind of received, you're looking at a unit that's now not very attractive in a lot of ways. It's really expensive, and if you invest in it, it's just not going to be doing what it did before. It doesn't hit as hard, it doesn't move as fast, and it's not technically as tough. Because, of course, Fate's Messenger can also be used to, pass an armor save if you need it. And then on top of it, they're more expensive. So, Wraithguard, I think, got the worst of the nerfs in this data slate for sure. Okay, so now that we've kind of gone over what exactly got nerfed, what do the nerfs mean, and where do we go from here? So I have several opinions on this that I want to share, and then we're going to kind of go into how to kind of get past the nerfs and, kind of understand how our army is going to function from here on out and how the meta changes from here. So first of all, I think the nerfs, both the Fate's Messenger and Wraithguard and Phantasm, of course, means that the Mighty Wraithbrick is a lot weaker. It's still tough to kill, but it's just not going to be as mobile, and it's going to be more expensive, so it's way more investment. It's less mobile, so it's oftentimes, unless, of course, you spend the command point to auto-advance 6 on the unit, it's not going to be as mobile to get to those objectives early. Which is really important, because if you can't get to those objectives early on, then unfortunately, you're not going to be able to hold them because Wraithguard have a very low OC count, right? They're only OC 1, so they're easily outscored on objectives if your opponent can get to them first. And also, realistically, the D-Scythe is now probably a really bad option for them. It was kind of borderline before. You always took really the Wraith Cannon, but now it's just really overcosted for what it does, in my opinion. But, we'll see how that progresses. But I think just, taking D-Scythes now is just totally out of the question. Whereas before, I was thinking to myself, if they nerfed a couple of things about Wraithguard, the D-Scythes might still be, a valuable option. Phantasm being a random D6 is probably the biggest hit to the faction. I don't even think the Strands-Ice hit is the biggest, because we can overcome that with different things. I think just quite frankly, the Phantasm nerf is massive. And it is going to affect how we build our armies and what we choose to include in our lists. And I just think Phantasm just isn't used. I think it became, kind of went from an auto, use kind of stratagem that you would use every single turn or every other turn to something you're probably barely going to use. And that's just because you can't plan anything around it, right? Like if you roll that 1 inch, you can't really do much with that. Right? You can't move back around that piece of terrain. You can't move out of charge range with that. It's just too risky to spend a command point on, and therefore I really think it's just bad, right? It's kind of like how Battle Focus was back in the day, right? You rolled a d6 and you moved that far, and it was okay if it was an army rule that a lot of different units just got automatically, but if it's something you have to spend actual resources on, there's probably very few situations in which you would be willing to spend a command point to use this unless you really had to get to an objective and you only had 1 command point and you didn't have Fire and Fade available to you. So that is a big nerf. And what that means is you're not going to really see that Wraith Brick being as mobile. Like I said, I think the Wraith Brick is probably dead. I doubt you're going to see that in the same way as before. I think you will obviously still see Wraiths in some way, shape, or form. In competitive lists, I think Wraith Blades have a lot more potential now, personally, with the Force Shields, because they're able to, pretty much get on objectives pretty easily, and they're, kind of a pretty good combat unit, too. They're not great, but with the Spirits here and there, who doesn't need Fate's Messenger in a Wraith Blade squad, you have some decent potential to hold objectives there. Whereas I kind of think Wraith Guard are just going to be dead weight in competitive play. I think, they're still fun to play. They still do a lot of damage and stuff. I just don't think they're going to be as good, especially with the changes to Phantasm and the other nerfs. The fact that Fate dice were reduced means that I think Fate dice reliant units are going to be a lot less efficient, and units not as reliant on Fate dice just got a lot more enticing. So things like Fire Prisms, they're very efficient even without Fate dice. I think those are going to be good. Void Weavers, the Harlequin kind of heavy support choice, I guess you could call them, are going to be a lot better because they just do flat damage. They do, 4 flat damage on their weapons. Unfortunately, the Wraith Lord Fate's Messenger combo with the Spirit Seer I was talking about is just, it's still okay. I just don't think it's as good as it once was. In fact, I probably wouldn't even use it. Maybe just have the Spirit Seer attached to the Wraith Lord and just give them a Weeping Stone or something like that. But it's nowhere near where it was. And I think it's dead competitively. I thought it was going to be a competitive choice going forward if they nerfed, Strands of Fate or whatever. But I just think personally, because Fate's Messenger is really only usable on the Death Jester and maybe the Autarch Wayleaper now, it's simply gone. So rest in peace to that combination. Might still be worth it to put a Spirit Seer with a Wraith Lord just to give it that +1 to hit, give it those lethal hits. But the Bright Lance combination, I think, is well and truly dead. It was fun while it lasted. I got to play it in many games and it was super fun to use. But unfortunately, it's out the window. Now, because of the double nerf as well to the Night Spinner, I think a lot of people out there are going to be, saying, singing the praises, Night Spinner is dead, the Wicked Witch of the West is dead. I think for the most part it is going to die, but because the Incar can still technically charge out of, during your turn, if the Night Spinners kill something, the Incar can still charge in. Devastating wounds are still a thing, right? Still does devastating wounds. They are more expensive, but people aren't going to be spending those crazy points on Wraithguard anymore. So maybe people are still going to use Night Spinners in their lists. They may not be spammed, but I can definitely see people still using one of them to prevent charges and stuff like that. Because again, you can advance with it, but it is -2 to advance rolls, -2 to movement, and in addition, -2 to charge rolls as well. So that's cumulative. So what that means is if a unit wants to move and advance and then charge, they're technically going to have to take 6 inches away from whatever they're rolling, which is very strong, right? So that is still a thing. That is still a thing. You can still, use a Night Spinner to prevent, charges and things like that and give you a little bit of board control. The Incar is still very good, so I know the Incar got nerfed as well, but it's not going to be as safe to enemy retaliation because it can only teleport during your turn. I do think this means it will be played much less in highly competitive play, but I think you'll still see it every once in a while because being able to charge something, especially to be able to deal with indirect fire and stuff like that in your enemy's backfield is a very powerful tool. Wraithguard only being able to shoot the unit that attacked them also really limits their damage potential. And again, like I said before, opponents can just bait it out. So I think it's just another reason why the Wraith Brick is 1 foot in the grave. And I have to say, this is just going to be my personal opinion. I don't think GW got this right. I know there's a lot of players out there who are rejoicing at the heavy nerf to the abilities and stuff like that, celebrating in the streets, popping champagne bottles, basically everybody who doesn't play Eldar, right? Or, rejoicing. But I don't think GW actually got this right, and here's why. By trying to rein in the OP elements of the Eldari army, they also kind of side nerfed all of the weaker units as well, while not providing any support to them. So less fate dice is going to be bad for a lot of units in the army, but also just units like Howling Banshees, right? Because Howling Banshees rely on a really good high fate dice or command point for a 6-inch advance. And now we don't have as much access to that. So in other words, by nerfing the whole army and saying, oh, you know what, we're not going to target the Warwalker specifically or any of your really high damaging, anti-large platforms specifically, or instead just going to nerf fate dice, they actually just blanketly kind of nerf the entire army in a small way. So there's a lot of units out there that do use fate dice for other things besides damage, and these things have been nerfed just a little bit. Just means we have a little bit less resources to work with. Phantasm is now extremely situational and went from a very strong stratagem to a very weak one. The initial nerf was more than enough. It was a good stratagem and it had a limiting factor in that only infantry could be targeted. To me, that was more than enough to make it balanced. Unfortunately, because of the Wraithguard, they had to, just really nerf those Wraithguard in 1, 2, 3, 4 different ways, right? Unfortunately, we saw another Phantasm nerf, which it wasn't OP on a lot of units in our index, maybe just OP on the huge Wraith Brick, right? But that's about it. So the stratagem is very weak now, and unfortunately, we're just going to have another stratagem in our arsenal that we don't really use all that often. The strongest units in the army, like the Incar, Avatar of Cain, and Fast aspects, remain pretty godly. The Incar is probably the exception to this, being a little bit on the weaker side now, but still not that weak, right? I think you're still going to see it in competitive play in a few builds. Especially lists that really build into that, casting Fortune and then Guide on the Incar and then having it teleport to something in the opponent's backfield is still going to be a nightmare. The Avatar of Cain, completely unchanged. Still going to be a god and still going to wreck face, right? Just as tough, just as many points. Yeah, Phantasm couldn't use it anyway, so who cares about Phantasm? Fate dice, well, it doesn't matter how many fate dice you have. If you have an Avatar of Cain in your army, you're probably going to be funneling most of them to the Avatar anyway. So I guess that is a slight kind of off nerf, but, again, Strands of Fate, the nerf to that kind of nerfed anything and everything on our index anyway, in a weird way. And then, of course, Fast aspects were untouched. No point changes to them, and really just no changes at all, except for, of course, Phantasm, which affected the entire army equally, weak or strong. So are people still going to use Warp Spiders? Absolutely. Are people still going to use Swooping Hawks and Shadow Specters? I say even more so. They're going to even use more of these units because of that fact. So when you see people building lists now, they're going to be building into a lot of the faster units to try to kind of make up for the fact that they're not going to be able to score primaries as easily. Or, of course, just take the Avatar of Cain, because the Avatar of Cain is exactly the same as it ever was. Okay, so let's talk about the meta and how I predict the changes will go. I think fate dice generators are going to become more prevalent. So things like Wraith Lords, Eldrad, and Guardian Defenders. I just did a video on Eldrad, and I think I shot myself in the foot. Fate is laughing at me right now because I said, if they change fate dice for whatever reason, I don't think they'll do it. Ha ha ha. But they actually did do it, and I think Eldrad, as a matter of fact, is going to be much more important. And I think you're definitely going to see him in quite a few competitive lists going forward. And again, Doom is important now, more important than ever, because less fate dice means less damage. You're going to want to be able to make sure that that damage goes through. As for the Wraith Lords and the Guardian Defenders, I don't think they're going to be massively seen in competitive play, but I do think you're going to see more of their presence in competitive play going forward because of their ability to generate fate dice. And I think the Wraith Lord is just kind of an underrated pick, and I think it's going to be seen more as well. Especially since you're not going to be seeing a Spirit Seer with, Wraith Guard necessarily. You might either see it with Wraith Blades, or you might, in some cases, see it with a Wraith Lord. The reason why you might see it with a Wraith Lord is because still kind of allows you to use Phantasm. D6 is a lot better on a monster than it is an infantry unit. And also, there might be some room to do a Weeping Stone combo where for every unit that you kill, you generate 2 fate dice. Again, might not be super competitive, but might be worth something looking into. Fire Prisms are also back due to their fate dice independence. And I'm telling you guys right now, you better buy them now. It's kind of a shame that Night Spinners are now, on the outs, but Fire Prisms are now on the ins. It's like, when can we ever get Fire Prisms or Night Spinners? It seems like one way or the other, they're always out of stock, or they're really expensive on eBay, and we're not going to spend $100 for a Fire Prism. Get real. So to all you eBay people out there who are selling Fire Prisms for way above retail price, go and sit in the warp. And, obviously, hopefully GW just prints more of these out because they're really great kits and we want them badly. The Ynnari are also looking extremely strong due to the cheaper Drukhari units. And again, the great thing about Ynnari is we still get that great detachment bonus with them. And yeah, we don't get the Autarch for the extra command point, but we have the access to, really good Dark Eldar units, which we are going to be able to afford more of. So I think Ynnari is on the rise as well. I also predict, of course, and this is probably not even a prediction, it's kind of an obvious thing, the Avatar of Cain is still very strong and will replace the Wraith Guard as the premier primary objective holder along with Wraith Blades. And yes, I think there is a strong chance that Wraith Blades with Force Shields have a lot more play now for, competitive play, the competitive scene, and also just with a Spirit Seer. Right? Because you don't have to worry about Fate's Messenger. Wraith Blades are cheaper, and they're also more durable than Wraith Guard. And because the Wraith Guard ability is just so easy to get around now, Wraith Blades just being able to be in combat, anything that charges them, they can attack back against. They're, in my opinion, a lot more viable. And of course, like I said before, no nerfs were really given to the fast aspects like hawks and spiders, they're still extremely strong and will continue to dominate the meta. Especially specters due to that insane 6-inch move they get after shooting. And guys, specters, they didn't change in points. And their rules didn't change either. So it looks like specters are still in, warp spiders are still good, swooping hawks are still good, and we're going to see a lot more of them going forward. Now, I do want to touch on the Dark Eldar because I have done some Dark Eldar content on this channel, and although I'm not going to do a full video analyzing all of the changes that Dark Eldar went through, I do think I want to kind of talk about it a little bit in this video, because it does relate to Ynnari as well. So just a quick note about them. Their combat did get significantly better with more AP. When they use Power from Pain, they now get -1 additional AP on their weapons. That is really good, especially on things like witches. Lilith is really strong right now. Lilith is going to whoop some ass. Also, just your basic succubus is going to be doing a lot more damage. She's definitely not going to be sucking anymore. You see what I did there? But yes, anyway, a lot of the Dark Eldar units in combat got a lot better. But, unfortunately, the Void Raven got nerfed, guys. Void Raven was OP. It was winning all the tournaments. It had to be nerfed. I have absolutely no idea why they nerfed the Void Raven. It seemed very bizarre. It seemed very out of the blue. It was one of those kind of derpy moments of GW, I guess you could say, because there was nothing wrong with the Void Raven. There was no problem with it, but for some reason they nerfed it. So Void Raven got nerfed. Now, there's some other good things about the Dark Eldar that did improve. A lot of their units did get point decreases. Off the top of my head, Reavers, Hellions, I think the Succubus got a points decrease, and several other units like the Venom and the Raider. I think some other units also got points decreases, but again, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. What got buffed? What got... I know there was basically no nerfs except the Void Raven for some reason, but a lot of things got point decreases. Now, what do I actually think about this, though? Because yes, obviously, the Dark Eldar are going to be stronger because of this. There is absolutely no doubt about that. But while decreasing point costs are nice, they aren't the issue with the army, and it seems to kind of benefit Ynnari more anyway, who can capitalize on their strong MSU. So once again, it seems like the Dark Eldar buffs actually helped the Eldar a little bit more. The buffs to the combat are nice, but units like witches are still very fragile and hard to get in combat. There was no change to Overwatch as far as I could see. If there was one, I didn't see it. But, you know, that means that it's still going to be hard for things like witches to actually engage units in close combat. Now, on the other hand, and I think one of the things I missed was the Talos. The Talos got a points decrease, which is great. I think the Talos is, you know, obviously still one of the best Dark Eldar units in the entire index. And between it and the Chronos, I think it's kind of carrying the Dark Eldar competitively right now. I have to say. The efficiency of the Talos and the Chronos are carrying the Dark Eldar. And I think those are going to be even more important going forward. Having AP -1, additional AP -1 on their weapons is very strong. I just don't think it makes the Dark Eldar more interesting to play. I think most of the problem with Dark Eldar right now is they don't have a lot of character, and I think that's still the same. I think they still don't have a lot of character, unfortunately. And one of the things they could have done to increase the character is maybe give them a better detachment bonus, but the detachment bonus remains terrible. And although the Archon can now join Incubi units, who cares, right? Why would you want him with Incubi in the first place? His abilities can't really benefit the Incubi that much anyway. The Incubi are much better with Drazar. And I believe Drazar also got a points decrease, but I may be wrong on that as well. But I actually do think Incubi and Drazar got a points decrease as well. So again, there's no point to putting an Archon in that unit. What's the point? The only point I can see is, you know, people who buy the Combat Patrol can now put the Archon in the Incubi instead of the Warrior Squad. But that's about it. Other than that, you're either going to want to run the Archon probably by himself alone or in a Kabbalite unit. And that's about it. So again, that change made no sense to me either. And then on top of that, the biggest complaint I probably have is that even though things like Grotesques got cheaper, they're not easy to fit into transports. And that didn't change, right? Grotesques are not easier to fit into transports. They don't count as 2 models. They count as 3 still. And on top of that, Homunculus and Urian Rakarth cannot fit inside of it. They can't join a unit of Grotesques. So again, I think, oh, the Archon can go with Incubi. Who cares? I want Homunculus with Grotesques, but they didn't give that to Dark Eldar players. And that is unfortunate. I wish they would have done that because I think that alone would have added some character back to the army, Being able to take a unit of Grotesques and just have your full flesh coven, come out of Raiders and things like that. Maybe reduce the amount of space that the, Grotesques actually took up in Raiders would help a lot. But yeah, the Dark Eldar did get stronger. I think their win rate is going to go up. But I just think that some of the changes that they could have made, they just missed. And that is unfortunate. Okay, so in conclusion, these nerfs are pretty severe to our core strengths, our efficient anti-large, our ability to reposition quickly, and our bird control aspects all got hit pretty hard. However, our aspects remain largely untouched by the nerfs, being mostly fate dice independent and cost efficient. So again, fire dragons, they do use fate dice. They are helpful on fire dragons, but fire dragons don't typically need them because of how cost effective they truly are. Being 85 points is a real bargain, and obviously they reroll ones to wound. In Falcons, they can reroll all wounds against their target. They're absolutely fantastic. The Swooping Hawks, Shadow Specters, Warp Spiders, and all of those aspects are still going to be great. Things like Dire Avengers and Dark Reapers might see more play just because of the fact that, again, those are more Fate Dice independent units. They don't really need Fate Dice to do damage, and they're pretty efficient for the cost. Now, although we don't know all the repercussions of the nerfs, I am going to make several videos this week covering what I think specifically are going to be our biggest hurdles to overcome. And really on paper, I kind of know that probably the hardest things to overcome are going to be the Phantasm change and the Strands of Fate change. I think we're probably going to feel those in every one of our games, no matter what units we're running, whether we're running the meta or whether we're running kind of something in between or even just a casual list. I think most people are going to feel that effect. So I will be running several games this week to try to figure that out and, come up with some videos on how to mitigate this a little bit more. I went over it briefly in this video, but I plan to go over it more in depth. And basically, yeah, that's going to be it for today's video. Let me know in the comments what you guys think of the nerfs. Try not to be too toxic about it, though. Honestly, it happens, right? Nerfs happen. I don't think GW was right in the way they went about it. But again, that's my opinion as someone who's played Eldar for over 20 years. So what do I know, right? But again, that's just what happened. That's what they went with. So we're just going to have to roll with it, roll with the punches, and win our games anyway. And of course, we are going to be able to do that because we're Eldar players. And this is one of the most strategically attuned communities in all of Warhammer 40k. So that's going to be it for today, guys. I will see you guys next time, and thank you so much to all my patrons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last year. Your help has greatly improved the channel and helped it grow so much. Also, if you want to become a patron and help support the channel, I have free trials activated, which will grant you permanent access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players and enthusiasts who love talking about strategy, tactics, and of course hobbying, and I will leave the link for that in the description. I also have a channel store page and am an Amazon affiliate, so if you want to grab some Eldar inspired apparel on my channel store page to rep your local game store or some discounted Eldar miniatures on Amazon, I will leave the links for those in the description as well. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your week and think about your list building and stuff like that and think about how you're going to overcome the nerfs. They did hit us pretty hard, but we can and we will overcome. So I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one and peace out.